I'm gonna show you how I took a simple idea like this and turned it into this. Rocket Powered Sounds hit me up to make a video with their Ultimate Serum bundle. So in this Drop of the Day episode, I'm gonna try to share with you everything that was going on in my head as I made this drop. I started with my FL Studio template at 150 BPM. I loaded the Time Warp patch from Rocket Powered Sounds and came up with this MIDI and added some drums to it. At this point, I knew I had the drop and that everything I added on top of this would just complement this idea that I have. So now I needed a cool initial bass hit. So I went with this patch called Neurotic because I like the texture, placed a MIDI note on a low D sharp and slowed down the LFO. Now this bass is the first thing people are gonna hear when this bass drops, so it is important that this hits very good, you know, like solid. It just has to be the best it can. So this bass wouldn't clash with the main glitchy bass. I had it fade out in volume. Then I added an EQ with a massive mid-range boost, plus my bass humidifier rack, and a multi-band compressor. These effects have made the sound a little bit more solid and full. Also around this time, I decided to layer a spread clap over the snare. I thought it sounded really nice. So now I'm thinking I can't keep this main patch intact. No matter how much I like it, I have to make some changes to it. Somehow make it better. Somehow like it more. So after looking into the patch, I found out it's kind of like two separate sounds being generated in the same synthesizer. So I really like this vowel sound coming out of oscillator 1. So I decided to edit the glitchy sound that was coming out of oscillator B. This sound is stepping down in pitch very quickly, so I decided to change the steps that are affecting that pitch. I also figured that by going for a pulse wave kind of wavetable, it might get a grosser sound altogether. And at this point I decided this main bass is not going to give me that powerful low end that I want to feel when the drop hits. So I decided to add a big sub bass that hits at the same time as my first snare. I went with this bass patch called Powerful Low End, in which I noticed that oscillator A was having the biggest effect on the noise oscillation speed. So I started messing with the wavetables until I found this one. One last small detail that I added to this patch was adding an LFO to the sub bass level to give the drop a bit of a bounce. This is what I really hope helps you guys. I want to talk about the glitchy sound first. I like to add Saturn to brighten up my sounds by adding a band on the high end and turning it up. Next, I added this EQ to cut the low end in order to make space for the sub. Finally, I added a stereo shaper with a stereoized preset that's placing this sound more on the sides of the mix every time the snare hits. When you're mixing, when you're creating music, there's an actual 3D space that you can imagine, okay? When you put things in mono, they will be in the middle of your mix, in the center, focus. When you put things stereo, they will be on the sides. Now the sub bass has my bass humidifier, of course, to keep the sub in the middle of the mix. Then an EQ that's hella boosting the low end, as you can see, and I've also added this peak right here. I've specifically put it on D sharp to give it that gross throaty sound. So I have all of these synths routed to my synth channel. So first I have a reverb plugin, which the level pretty much stays below the middle the whole time, but on some parts with an automation clip, I'm raising that mix to create a bigger sense of space, like right before the snares or on that initial hit. Then I loaded I Am Pusher, looked through the presets till I found this one, and I just switched the bass note to a D sharp. You can tell that with this plugin, it gives it that beef and power that we want to feel on a drop. Finally, a limiter to just solidify the squashing and just really bring everything together. One little detail is that I grabbed the tail of this sound and I've reversed it and used it as a sweep. However, I am mindful of how much of this signal I send to my master channel. I'm finding that sweet spot between the volume of the drums and the volume of my synths, where the drums are clipping a little bit, so they're really punching through and you can hear them very nicely, but the bass is also the loudest that it could be. So there's a very nice sweet spot that you have to find for yourself in whichever scenario you find yourself in while making music, making drops. I'm thinking this could use a little bit more energy, so I added some cymbals. High frequency sounds are actually great ways to add energy to your song. But without even consciously thinking of that, I added a patch I've made called Lil Monster Tension. At this point, I'm like, fuck yeah, the drop is pretty much there. Now I could just like mess around and add more elements that I know will help the energy of the drop. For example, cymbals, white noise, super powerful ways to add high energy. It's kind of obvious, but it's not. It's like high-end frequencies, high energy frequencies. You know what I mean? Like, it makes sense. Reverse sweeps are also super powerful, and I'm using them a lot here. And I layered this big clap over the snares. Also some tom rolls. And all of the samples that you're hearing are actually coming from my own sample pack. At this point, I'm like, yo, some vocals would sound tight. So I started experimenting, putting a chant, chopping up some vocals.
You ain't got me.
Throwing some effects on it. And I have to say, it definitely adds another layer of complexity to the entire drop, especially the way this sample layers with the snare. That's fundamentally everything from this drop. I then made some variations in the drop. For example, I changed the wavetable and oscillator B on the main bass, giving it a little bit of a higher tone, turning the Lil Monster Tension up and down an octave. And I hope you can identify all of these changes now that we're gonna hear the entire drop together. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the fuck out of the like button and subscribe. Big shout outs to Rocket Powered Sounds for sponsoring this video. If you want to check out more presets from their Ultimate Serum bundle, check the link in the description. This project will be available for my Patreon, so consider becoming a Patreon, and I'll see you guys on the next vid. Peace.